I was saving body parts such as skulls and skeletons, and eventually I did turn to cannibalism.
Jeffrey Dahmer. He didn't rely on dramatic weapons or chaotic scenes. From 1978 to 1991, he operated quietly, luring adult and late-teen men to his apartment, often with offers of money for photographs. His approach was collected and unsuspecting. Once back at home, he isolated the encounter. He incapacitated his victims with sedatives, then used strangulation. Later, necrophilia and he dismembered remains. He documented aspects of the crimes with Polaroids and a few retained items, details investigators later corroborated through evidence folders and case files. Many victims were young men whose disappearances were not immediately linked. The truth was hidden in plain sight. For more than a decade, incidents in Ohio and Milwaukee appeared. They were looked into as isolated, missing persons, unexplained absences, and few clear connections between them. Without a visible pattern, separate reports were never put together. After his arrest, Dahmer gave a detailed, matter-of-fact account of multiple killings, aligning locations, victims, and timelines investigators had not previously realized. July 22, 1991, Milwaukee. Tracy Edwards escaped from Dahmer's apartment and flagged down police. Dahmer ultimately admitted to 17 murders. What stands out is the simple routine and the longevity of the crimes within a single community, encounters that went unconnected until that night. He was a killer hiding in the system. Born in 1960 in Milwaukee, he was moved around often as a child, growing isolated, withdrawn, and fixated on animal remains and crude taxidermy. Alcohol abuse escalated in his teen years. In 1978, weeks after high school, he lured Stephen Hicks in Ohio, killed him, and hid the remains, the first murder. Then came dormant stretches. He served a brief U.S. Army stint, then had relocated back to Milwaukee. He was no stranger to the law. Arrests for disorderly conduct and sexual assault, yet no homicide suspicion. Many victims were young men, often black, Asian, Latino, or immigrant, met near bars, bus stops, or street corners. He found it easy to relate. Shared vulnerabilities included economic insecurity and unstable housing. Homophobia and stigma discouraged reporting, leaving many disappearances unnoticed. With few leads, some were misclassified or deprioritized across jurisdictions. Missing persons reports and unidentified remains were not promptly connected. Patterns slipped between the cracks for years. His approach emphasized simplicity and yet control. Always start in public spaces, bars, malls, outside clubs. He offered money for pictures or to accompany for a drink, then would suggest a quieter stop, apartment 213 at the Oxford Apartments. Conversation stayed casual. He framed it as brief company and a fun photo shoot. The invitation felt voluntary, the setting ordinary, and the transition out of view went unnoticed. Inside, he would use sedatives to diminish resistance, then employed strangulation. The method usually left minimal immediate trauma. With toxicology delays and limited visible injury, early examinations often yielded little and rooms appeared undisturbed. Afterwards, sometimes necrophilia. Then concealment followed, dismemberment, use of chemicals to hinder identification. He retained photos and in some instances remains which were either stored and collected or eaten, behaviors documented later clinically in the record. Neighbors recalled little, sounds were muted, encounters brief, movements routine, nothing that clearly signaled a crime. Between victims, he simply blended back into daily life. Without clear crime scenes or prompt missing person reports, potential linkages across incidents failed to surface. Cases were misclassified or left open with few leads, absent robust data sharing, and with many victims marginalized, the broader pattern remained invisible. Only later would interviews, recovered photographs, and forensic reanalysis clarify his process and chronology, transforming files into a coherent sequence. What seemed isolated mishaps were ultimately pieced together. The year is 1978. Near Cleveland, Ohio, Jeffrey Dahmer picks up a hitchhiker, Stephen Hicks, and brings him back to his family home. What follows becomes the origin point of his pattern: isolation, alcohol, and a sudden escalation that ultimately ends a young man's life. Hicks never makes it to his destination. Dahmer awaits his opportunity, then attacks Hicks with a 10-pound dumbbell. Subdued, Dahmer then strangles him, kills him at the house, later buries his remains in the yard. No witnesses. No immediate forensic trail. The first known victim misread in the moment, foundational in hindsight. In that beginning, the method takes shape. Approach in public, move to privacy, control, concealment. For years, the case sits apart from a larger story, one that will only be recognized much later after unimaginable harm. Fast forward to 1991, Milwaukee. Late one night, a boy named Conorak Synthasen Phone is seen disoriented and injured in an alley. Neighbors call 911. Officers arrive. They listen. They look. And in the critical moments that follow, a decision is made that cannot be undone. Conorak is returned to Dahmer's apartment. Inside, the explanations sound plausible enough to the responding officers. Dahmer appears calm. He frames the encounter as a private matter between partners. Without further inquiry, the officers leave. Conorak does not survive the night. The community will learn the truth only after the apartment is searched, far too late to save him. That doorway becomes a symbol of systemic failure, missed signals, assumptions, and the fatal cost of deference in a moment that demanded scrutiny. The records show the sequence with stark clarity: calls, reports, timelines, each detail amplifying the tragedy. It is not just a crime, it is a collapse of safeguards meant to protect the vulnerable. In reviews that followed, the focus fell on procedure, bias, and training. Why were warning signs discounted? Why was a 14-year-old teenager returned to an adult stranger's apartment without deeper verification? The unanswered questions became a call for reform, policy, practice, accountability. When the case finally breaks open, evidence from the apartment connects multiple victims across time. Families who had no answers confront a truth that is both clarifying and devastating. The contrast is stark. Hicks in 1978, the origin largely invisible. Conorak in 1991, the moment that revealed the system's blind spots. Together they show how opportunity, isolation, and institutional gaps enabled a predator. In the end, the evidence is overwhelming. The impact is communal: grief, anger, and a demand that procedures be stronger and protections fairer so that no one is left unseen and no warning goes untested. Cross-jurisdiction reviews revealed a multi-year arc taking shape. He moved often. Arrests and repeated complaints clustered around apartment 213. Neighbors reported smells and noises. Incident logs aligned with periods when nearby men went missing. Maps showed overlaps between missing person reports and his known haunts. The approach was consistent: lure from bars or bus lines. Typical age range, late teens to early 30s. Meeting spots, transport routes, and timelines aligned across cities. Only after the 1991 apartment search consolidated physical evidence did the pattern become undeniable. Several structural factors delayed identification. He moved frequently, limiting repeated scrutiny in any one jurisdiction. Pre-digital systems rarely shared data reliably, especially across state lines and agencies. Files stayed local, paper logs, and siloed databases, making national patterns hard to see. Marginalized victims were underreported. Responses were shaped at times by bias and homophobia. Without consistent follow-up or confirmed identification, incidents were logged as isolated events. A well-known example is the 1991 Conorak Synthasen Phone incident, where misjudgment returned a victim to danger. Such process failures show how signals were missed. The result is pattern persisted for years. For years, the files gathered dust, tragic, unresolved, and thought to be unsolvable. Then in 1991, a living witness changed everything. Tracy Edwards escaped from apartment 213 and led Milwaukee officers back inside. What they found were Polaroids and human remains, immediate, undeniable evidence. The arrest followed at once. The cold mystery had become an active crime scene. In custody, the interrogations began. He spoke in detail: addresses, sequences, objects, accounts that aligned with what investigators documented in the apartment. The statements were not taken at face value. They were matched against physical evidence, photographs, and timelines to establish corroboration. Procedure drove every step: scene processing, chain of custody, lab verification, and cross-checking of victim identifications. Piece by piece, the interviews and the evidence converged into a coherent narrative of criminal conduct that could stand in court. Detectives compiled chronologies, synced statements to records, and documented each linkage. The goal was not sensationalism, it was admissibility: facts, methods, and materials that met the standards of proof required for prosecution. By 1992, the case moved from the lab and interview room to the courtroom. Voir dire motion on exhibits, each element prepared to demonstrate intent, capacity, and corroborated acts. The framework was accountability through process, not shock. The jury found him legally sane and guilty. In Wisconsin, he received 15 life terms, effectively ensuring he would never be released. The sentence reflected both the scope of the crimes and the weight of the evidence presented. Later in Ohio, he was convicted again and given an additional life sentence. Separate jurisdictions, consistent outcomes, each reinforcing the legal record and the permanence of the penalty. Verdicts are more than headlines. They are formal acknowledgments of responsibility. Here, the court's findings match the facts, and the punishment matched the harm, life terms without parole. For families and investigators, this was procedure doing its work. The record stands, a clear chain from discovery to conviction, with the justice system asserting at last accountability. Jeffrey Dahmer was murdered in prison in 1994 by another inmate by the name of Christopher Scarver. Scarver beat Dahmer and another inmate, Jesse Anderson, to death using a metal bar while they were on work detail. 17 victims are confirmed. Families and communities continue to heal. Missed opportunities prompted reforms, from data sharing to community engagement.